Okay, and I'm back. There was a little snafu there that I became confused by the way things were being listed, but everything is great. The show is on, and the show must go on. 617-396-4958. What is in your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958. You know, there are so many things that I would like to discuss, but I feel nervous about discussing in these times of political censorship on YouTube and elsewhere. That, under normal circumstances, of course, we would discuss them. But, I feel like I must proceed with by the use of euphemisms. Uh, I woke up this morning and I saw a brief video that recounted or discussed this movie called Utopia. I believe I looked it up. I found out that there are several movies called Utopia, one of which was made for Netflix earlier in early 2020. Um, and another one which goes back a little further than that. And both of them seem to have the same theme that this video maker, who's actually on TikTok, claimed that it had. And so I haven't actually gone through the laborious effort, frankly, of watching either one of these movies. One of them is a movie, the other one's a miniseries. But I am going to encapsulize what this videographer said is in it, and because I think whether or not he had it right exactly, he's a legitimate videographer, and it has relevance. And that is that they both presented a science fictional scenario by which a virus would be released, a biologically created virus, one created in a lab. I suppose the modern parlance for that is gain of function. What that means is that they've taken pieces of a virus, a bat virus, or they've combined it with one or more bat viruses, and they've spliced it in with some other material, perhaps embryonic stem cells, dare I suggest? Whatever it is, and again, I heard that from another source, and they create a weapon. They weaponize a virus. And then again, this is science fiction. This isn't me saying this. This isn't what I'm claiming to be fact, all of you YouTube censors. The science fiction version of this miniseries is that this virus is then released from the laboratory onto the world as a way to reduce populations in the world and to control societies. The use of fear is a very potent element, of course. It gets to the most basic structural aspect of of who we are, which is that we want to live. We want to have some security. So, the idea of using fear in this science fiction story, this is not me saying this, is that the fear of this virus, especially when coordinated with well-selected doctors who become spokesmen for various governments and who basically purge any other medical people who don't agree and who are put up as official spokespeople, and with the informal connivance of media, whether it be conventional media, print, television, or radio, which many say had been infiltrated a long time ago. This isn't me saying this. This is the premise of this science fiction story called Utopia, along with more modern modalities of communication like big tech, would basically tell this fearful story. I mean, that we're all going to die, that we're all at risk. We can't step outside our door unless we cover our faces in a way that might be similar to a burqa, that we all have to, shut down our businesses temporarily We can only go to the big businesses, which are allowed to stay open. That we all have to start just taking money from the government as a recompense for the shutdown. And that we all should stay inside. The eventually in this particular science fiction scenario, a vaccine is suddenly created and appears available. The vaccine, which according to this scientific according to this science fiction, apparently has worse side effects ultimately than the virus itself, and that the virus itself had been exaggerated. The vaccine leads to questions of population. Let's just put it this way. Even though this is a science fiction story, I feel reluctant saying this. So it leads to questions of population control. Let's put it that way. And that ultimately the utopia comes about because the smart people, the leaders, the ringleaders, actually are injected with a saline solution as opposed to the vaccine, so they don't feel the ill effects of the vaccine. And of course, they then are able to assume control of the world. Now, this, again, is a science fiction story that came out of apparently Netflix in a miniseries called Utopia. I have no way of knowing whether it ran yet or did it run, but it's interesting to think about and interesting to note. Let's just put it that way. Again, I feel reluctant to go too deep here because, again, we're talking YouTube, the very same people who are censoring political opinion and of whom we have to be careful on getting into these subjects. So we have now a situation where we may again be heading into more lockdowns. Apparently, it's already happening in Sydney, Australia. Apparently the army has been called out to force people to stay indoors. And there are hints that it's coming here. We know that this, I'm not in any way minimizing, to get back to reality here, the actual virus. I do think that it's real. I think it's biological. I think a majority of medical personnel are now openly saying that it was created in a lab and it's deadly. Nor am I coming here to criticize the vaccine. I've had the vaccine, as have my family. Maybe it's my paranoid nature, but I keep thinking that I'm having problems because of it. But it probably is in my mind because I read some of these horror stories and I'm like, oh, there it is. We'll see. I think we're going to know a year from now. But what is now being admitted by the CDC is that it basically doesn't really work as well as they said it was going to work, certainly against the newest variation, and that people with the vaccine carry the virus just as much as anyone who doesn't have it. And that, they can spread it. So that's really distressing news. And, it makes me think that we might be moving toward another lockdown. Now, part of me thinks the American people are not going to put up with that. In fact, we're seeing people in other parts of the world. France comes to mind. Britain comes to mind. Italy, where people are saying, we've had enough. We're not going to put up with it. We're certainly not going to go for the passport, which might be part of this agenda in the science fiction story. But yet I fear that we're moving in that direction here, in that it's a matter of time. Maybe they're waiting till September, October, or they're trying to time it in such a way that there will be another lockdown. We will once again have to shut down our small businesses, and that this will be used as an excuse to do the same thing they did last time, which is to paper the House with absentee ballots. Millions and millions of absentee ballots, unsolicited, sent out to we don't know who. That combined with the same electronic voting that we were warned about by people like Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar and many other people in positions of power, that is going to continue to play a role in terms of regulating algorithms and anticipating votes and doing all of the weighting that maybe they might have done last time. I'm not saying they did. So don't get me wrong here, YouTube censors. I'm just saying that there are questions that have been raised. There's a reason why all polls indicate that over 60% of Republicans believe that things did not go right in the last election. I'm not going to say what didn't go right. I'm just saying that they think things didn't go right, okay? And I would even argue that the number is bigger than that, because when people are polled and asked that question, they might be afraid to answer that honestly. They might be afraid that they might have the FBI show up. Their name could go on a list, and they could be put into prison like these poor political prisoners that are being held in Washington without with no charges brought against them yet, and in some cases, according to their lawyers, in solitary confinement, and they've been tortured and beaten. All right, we know what I'm talking about there. I'm not going to get specific because, again, this is YouTube and we have to deal with censorship. But so what I'm saying here is that I think a lot more people believe that there were something not right. There's something stinks about the last election, and they won't say it because they're afraid. And so as we head toward the midterm, which by any conventional information indicates that the Republicans are going to take back the U.S. House and expand their margin in the U.S. Senate. And when I say take back, I mean with possibly historic numbers. This could be, if this election was free and clear, it could be a take back that will affect a generation to come. And that if it happens, and indeed the Republicans do take back both houses, they're going to investigate things like the 2020 election. They're going to investigate in the real sense the events of January 6th, what really did happen there, okay? And they're going to investigate a lot of other things that constitute corruption in our society. The implementation of the critical race theory in schools, which is communism and racially divisive. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And other same such programs. They're going to look at why it is that the virus has caused, or they're recommending that people put back, face coverings and shut down businesses, while at the same time, in a manner that is unlike any other country in the world, they're allowing people to come into the country without even checking on their vaccine status or their virus. They're coming into the country by the many, many thousands, tens of thousands. I've seen reports of upwards of 1 million. I don't know if I believe that, but certainly, 40, 50,000, where they're being bused to different parts of the country. I wonder where, right? We don't know where. I wonder if it's maybe the red states. We've got reporters filming this on the border. Ben Berquan comes to mind, good reporter. We'll get to the bottom of that if the midterm brings back the Republicans to the numbers that they will have, which tells me that the conspirators who may have been engaged possibly, maybe, in improprieties during this last election, I'm not saying what they were, but they may be tempted to engage in those same sort of improprieties for the midterm. It might become seen as a necessity for them to preserve the power that they seized in 2020. Otherwise, they're going to lose that power and they could be exposed. So sure, there'll be a lockdown. There'll be a massive mailing of and all the same evils that happened last time. Massive mailing of unsolicited ballots, which go to who knows who, and algorithm manipulations, possibly. I'm not saying it happened. I'm saying it's possible. That's my opinion. I hope I don't get shut down for that. But if I do, I do. I hope not. And so that's what I feel right now. And I see it as part of a bigger agenda. I see it as part of the Great Reset of Klaus Schwab, which he's the sort of the guru of Davos, which talks about a world which implementation of world socialism and things like the Green New Deal and getting rid of meat. You can't eat meat anymore. And other same such agendas. I see it as part of that. And I do believe it's satanic because it runs against human nature. Anyways, as far as critical race theory goes, I'm not going to go too deep into that other than to say that I saw an interview with Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is one of the architects of the critical race theory, University of North Carolina. Now I believe she's at Howard University after she was denied tenure. She was interviewed, I think it was on on the New York Times. I listened to their podcast with Michael, what's his name? Michael Barbaro. And I have to just say that, I mean, I was very unimpressed with her intellect. She seemed very much a lightweight, and she seemed very much involved in this kind of nonsense, these lies that President Donald Trump had something against Black men and women. This is a big deal for her, right? And that somehow Barack Obama, on the other hand, simply because he happened to be Black, was good for Black people, which I think is also frankly untrue. I don't think he was either good or bad to do any. I think he was generally not good to anybody as a president because of his economic policies. But somehow Trump is this villainous character. And she mentioned as proof of that, one of the big lies that is now being promulgated by the left, and it has everything to do with the 2020 election. And that is this idea that by the states reasserting this sovereign responsibility to regulate elections, that they're doing it because they want to stop Black people from voting. That is a goddamn lie. They're protecting Black people from fraud. Oh, I said the word, from the F word. That's what state legislators are charged to do. That's why the founding fathers specifically put in the U.S. Constitution, when it was ratified in 1888, 1889, Article 2, that the state legislators are responsible for regulating elections, period. Not judges, not governors, not the federal government, and certainly not bureaucrats, but elected state legislators. You know, the left likes to talk about democracy. This is the function of democracy. And to undermine that is undermining democracy. This is a democratic principle. We elect people on the state level to serve and to represent us and to serve our interests, assumedly, in our respective state houses. That is the closest form of government we have, other than local government and local city councils, of course, and school boards. That's a whole different subject. And by the way, we should be getting involved with that. But the state legislators regulate elections, and every election, every 2 years, including the presidential election, which is every 4 years, but on the 2-year period schedule, is essentially 50 separate elections run in 50 separate states, and that those states have the right to regulate their elections. Now, do they have a right to discriminate against people of color or anyone else? No. That would be a violation of the federal Constitution, the 13th and 14th Amendments. So, they're not doing that, nor sure, obviously shouldn't be doing it. But they are not passing laws that discriminate against any particular group, period. They're passing laws that protect all the people of their state equally. Otherwise, they would not be able to do it. They could be charged. There could be a suit brought against them, and rightfully. But the charge is that somehow African Americans or people of color are not capable of registering to vote. They're not capable of providing an ID. That's a lie. They are, just like everyone else. It's almost a racist attitude to suggest otherwise. I mean, if you rent an apartment, you have to have an ID. If you buy a 6-pack of beer, you have to have an ID. If you do anything in our society, you have to have an ID. Everyone has one. And if they don't have one, then these liberal groups who are screaming about this, why don't they take some of their huge donations of money? I mean, Black Lives Matter has had unbelievable amounts of money pouring in, right? From municipalities, from people. I mean, I know someone, a young woman who actually was going out selling baked goods to give money to Black Lives Matter. I can only imagine how much money they have. Maybe they should use some of it for something good. Find people who don't have ID and help them get ID. Probably not that complicated. Instead, they're putting the money in their pockets, I would argue. And we know that one of the heads of that group has, 6 mansions, one of which is in the Bahamas. And she's asked about this by the media. And she says, oh, this is good for Black people. Really? Anyway, there's nothing to that. It's almost a racist kind of white man's burden attitude. They treat Black people like children as if they can't get ID. Yeah, they can get ID, and they should get ID. Of course, they have it. And we should encourage and help people register. The reason that the states are passing those laws is to protect all of us from fake votes, fraudulently cast votes. That's why they're doing it. And if you have a fraudulently cast vote in an election, that in every definition of the term constitutes voter suppression. If you vote, you go out, you're a registered voter, and you go out and you vote for candidate X, and then there is a fake vote that's cast for candidate Y, your vote has been suppressed. That is voter suppression. So what you do to reduce and try to eliminate voter suppression is that you have your state house pass laws to reduce that from happening by putting in standards of proof. Now, I know I've said it before, and I think it's worth saying again, and that is that my own state of Massachusetts has very high standards when it comes to the vote. I happened to vote absentee this last time, as did my family. But in order to do that, we had to contact our state clerk. They mailed us a ballot after we requested it. We then signed it and put it into a sealed envelope and mailed it back. And they double checked when they got it back, the signature to see if it was the same one that was on file before they cast the vote for us in absentia. That's fine. That's not what happened. And that's, some of the laws that were changed to reduce that and to allow papering the House under the guise of the COVID emergency were passed behind the back of the state legislatures. They were passed fiat by judges, by secretaries of state. There are some really corrupt ones. They were left-wing secretaries of state who had received funding from George, the guy's last name rhymes with Soros, okay? And the Southern Poverty Law Center and other leftist groups, this election group that the Gateway Pundit is talking about, Zuckerberg, apparently handed out $400 million to help them get into office and to help them fund their offices. They started to pass regulations without the approval of the state legislature. That's unconstitutional. So the state legislators are simply reasserting their right. It's too late now in a way. Well, it is too late for this last election to pass laws and regulate elections in a way that protects the voter. All right, so enough on that. I don't want to get into any more trouble than I'm in. If you're out there and you want to call in, by the way, you're welcome to do it. I'm at 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. I think that my suspension from TikTok should be over, I think on Wednesday. And, again, I'm in a very ticklish position here as a former radio host who's trying to build an online platform, in that I have a list of guests that I'd like to have on the show. But I'm scared to have them on, because if I have them on, I'll be canceled. They want to talk about issues that are now forbidden. And these are political issues. They're not anything that would in any way violate, conventional community standards. I mean, I understand what those standards are as a former radio talk show host who has worked in radio stations and who has been in buildings where I've conducted talk shows, where I have to, there's an owner there sometimes. These are small radio stations in Greater Boston, where you have staff. You've got salespeople, you've got administrators, you've got a board op. You go in there and you have to be with people and look them in the eye. I mean, they know what I'm doing and they know what I'm saying. And so that alone requires a certain degree of censorship, self-censorship, and community standards. And plus, I understand the FCC and I observe those. What we're talking about, however, right now, and I'm not sure that it completely extends to radio yet, but certainly with the big tech, is something that's beyond community standards. It's political censorship, because the things I'd like to talk about are things that are political issues that are legitimate. I've certainly heard here in Boston, Jeff Cooner talk about these things. And Jeff, WRKO is the biggest station in New England. And he's got a staff of people that vet the material. Believe me, if he says something untrue, he'd be gone. So he's able to get into, questions about the election of 2020 and questions about the pandemic that you cannot talk about on YouTube. So my point being that this is a political censorship, and it's a disgrace. It's really disturbing to me in this country, and it kind of goes to the premise of one of my most recent books, Toward Fascist America. So, and I'm going to finish up just briefly by commenting on Hannah Nicole Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, which has been so controversial and which basically rewrites American history to suit a particular agenda. Now, if you take a look at the authors of this project, and they are listed on the letterhead, I don't think that any of them are historians. Maybe one or two. There's this one guy, he's a historian at Princeton. His name is Muhammad. I don't know if he's American. We're talking about American history here. I would think that you could find an American historian. But the rest of them they're poets, they're playwrights, they're, artists, they're a lot of media, a lot of columnists and journalists. And they've created this thing that we are told represents the Black perspective on American history. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it is true, actually. I think it represents their specific left-wing perspective on Black history. I don't think most Black people embraced much of the things in this project. Now, I am reading it, and what I would say in the positive sense is that it does delve into some rather difficult and nasty events in American history in terms of racism and in terms of slavery and some of the horrors that are associated with that. We should study that. We should acknowledge that many of our founding fathers, including Washington and Jefferson and Madison and Andrew Jackson, and several of our presidents were slave owners. They derived their income from human trafficking. It's terrible. It's a horrible history. We should acknowledge that, and we should acknowledge the effect that that's had. I am in no way suggesting otherwise. What I would say, however, is that they are tilting it in a way that puts it into a context that is overtly and overly anti-American in the broader sense, in that they are trying not just to address technical historical issues, but they are calling for tearing down our entire social order. I mean, they want to replace it with Marxism. These are open Marxists. They're using that as an excuse. And I think that if you put it into context, I mean, they take major liberties. I mean, they're pointing out, for example, that the American Revolution was an attempt to stop the British from abolishing slavery in this country. Completely false. There is not a single shred of evidence to back that up. They made that up whole cloth. Not only that, but that has not been the conventional view of Black people. It's something that they've are introducing. They've made it up. Now, first of all, they cite in the article, and this part I did read, they make vague reference, I may add, very historically shoddy from a historian standpoint, reference to some unnamed people in Great Britain who wanted to abolish slavery. Well, first of all, the British themselves did not abolish slavery until the 1830s, about 50, 60 years after the American Revolution. And that was due to the influence of Christian thinker William Wilberforce. And they don't mention the names of anybody, but there's no evidence that there were British thinkers at the time that wanted to abolish slavery. None. There is, however, evidence that in the United States, there was an abolitionist movement, and that many of the northern colonies had already abolished slavery at the time of the American Revolution, and that there were some great leaders who were anti-slavery, including Alexander Hamilton. The Adamses, I think, were, but they were a little bit less vigorous about it. They were more interested in preserving the Union, but generally they were. I mean, it's a complicated question. And that there was great debate about this at the time of the ratification of the Constitution. And the only reason why slavery was allowed to survive was because they wanted to have a union, and that the slaveocracy, the forces of slavery, were too strong to overcome at that time. The idea was that eventually they would. And eventually they did. It took a civil war and the loss of 600,000 men and women but they were able to do that. I mean, this is history. So, I think that we need to put history in a perspective and recognize that we have been white supremacists in the past and that racism has been real, but we need to look at it in the context of the world and the Western Hemisphere. And I think as a glass half full in terms of looking at how far we've come and look at the forces that led to our reduction in and our moves away from slavery. And those forces, frankly, have been the forces of the free market. Slavery and racism were upheld by elite power structures that use the force of law to preserve their position. When the free market has been able to work, racism reduces because people rise up and they achieve the American dream. So, this, in a way, ultimately, the 1619 Project, as it's being very leftist, is seeking to preserve the apparatus that creates racial division, creates strong and well-defined class divisions, as opposed to the forces of nature and the proper roles of government, which is to protect rights, that would allow for the emergence of individual success, wealth creation, a middle class, and freedom. And I think that when we do that, when we allow the free market to work, things like slavery become less relevant and eventually they become irrelevant, sort of like anti-Semitism. It's there, but it's not relevant to the degree that, in my case, it affects my life directly. It stops me from fulfilling my dreams. And I think the same thing would be true with racism. If we allowed the forces of nature, the free market, and an appeal to the best of American ideals to operate instead of this kind of divisive Marxist anti-American approach, but where you have people who literally view people based on their race as if that really does mean something to who an individual is. It means what you want it to mean. Anyhow, or as my late grandmother used to say, anyhow, I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. Again, I'm in a difficult position in my interest to promote the program because there are so many things I want to talk about, so many guests I want to have on, but I can't because of censorship, and also because I'm being shadow banned. The program isn't growing as quickly as I've been told it would otherwise grow. So those are my dilemmas. That's what I'm struggling with. I shall forge forward, however. I want to thank you for watching today. Charles Moscowitz. Check out my website, charlesmoscowitz.com. And the program is self-sponsored by my own books, which are available at Amazon Books. I've written probably almost 20 books now, dealing with various political, social, cultural, and economic subjects. And more recently, I've been writing spiritual books. I wrote God is God, but now my latest is called The Satanic Conspiracy. So that one I want to hold up here. You can check it out. The Satanic Conspiracy. There's my name. Yeah, there we go. And I'm proud of this one. It's available at Amazon Books. I'm now writing a sequel, which is The Satanic Elite. The Agenda of the Satanic Elite, 2020-2021. But for now, you can get this book. It's very inexpensive. It's not a big book. It costs about $3. Check it out. Amazon Books. Charles Moscowitz, The Satanic Conspiracy. So thank you very much for joining me, everyone. God bless you all. Let's keep the faith. Let's keep the movement moving forward. God bless America.